All right, first lecture, World Economic History. So we are going all the way back. This is just going to be a big overview of the history of the world in terms of growth. Question: if you could go live in any time period, where would you go? Or when would you go? The 1920s, whatever. Pick whatever. Just think about it. When would you go? And I'll sweeten the deal, put you in the top 10% of the richest people. Does this change your answer? Okay, just think about this. This will sort of be the unifying fun question of the lecture. And so to kind of answer this, there will be a right answer at the end, but we want to think about how the world has changed over time. So here is the world population in terms of millions of people, and so we can see this sort of explosion. If we were to continue this up until the present, what is it? 7 billion right now. But what is crazy to think about is that for most of human history, the standard of living stayed the same. So, from 10,000 BC, essentially the quality of someone's life at 10,000 BC was the same as someone in 1800 on average. Obviously, there's some variations, some differences, but in general, some Jesus's, like the quality of his life, like in terms of the food he ate, like his standard of living, was not that different from an English peasant or somebody living in Tahiti or something like that. Not much difference over time or between the places in the world. Everything changes in 1800. Explosion of growth. This is called the hockey stick graph because it looks like a hockey stick. But what we're seeing with GDP data compiled, which essentially what we're measuring is the standard of living, or like think about it as average income per person. It's pretty constant, and then boom, it shoots up. Okay, basically it shoots up, starts to change around 1800. So this is like our first big whatever fact, is that the world completely changes in 1800 to growth shoots up. So what has happened is, like, human history has not been linear. It hasn't been like, oh, hey, we're steadily getting better. We're steadily getting better. No, something changes in 1800. Something fundamental changes about the way economic growth works, where for centuries it's stagnant. And then now the norm is constant growth, constant new inventions, constant new innovations. That's the norm in the present. The norm in the present is we should expect something totally different in terms of technology 10 years from now. When I was in college 20 years ago, there was no there was email, but no one used it. There was no social media. That's just in 20 years. So that's the norm that we live with, where your life is different than your parents' life, which is way different than your grandparents' life. If we were to go back before 1800, that peasant's life, that peasant living in wherever, Yorkshire or whatever in England, their life is exactly the same as their grandfather's life, and so on. We go to Japan. A peasant in Japan's life is the same as their great-grandfather's life. We're looking at 1800 and going back. So the constant change, that's something totally new. All right. As we zoom in a bit, we can see kind of this takeoff and then a little more takeoff here in the 20th century. And one of the ways to think about this, so maybe this is abstract for you. Maybe you're like, okay, what's this professor talking about? GDP per capita, whatever, income, who cares? Like I don't even know what these words mean. I just told you what they meant. Income per person. Think about it like that. But if that's still too abstract, think about light. Light, you say? Light. And so this is the price per lighting. Okay. So now you don't even think about light. Now I just told you to think about light. You're like, what's he talking about? Now you just walk into a room, flip a switch, boom, illumination. Wow, what a wonderful world. We barely think about how much it costs, because typically, in terms of electricity costs, like a light bulb is pretty cheap. All right. Maybe our parents yell at you, whatever, but it's not that much. That's what light looks like in the present. It's very cheap. Okay. This is basically the price per lighting unit. All right. And so, in the present, per million lumen hours, which is basically, just think about this as, like a standard, a standard light bulb. It's virtually, doesn't cost much. To get that level of light back in 1300 would cost 35,000 British pounds, about $50,000. Okay. And we can see how this has evolved over time. And the key difference here is in 1800, where it really starts to become cheaper. Okay. So to just get like the basic lighting in your house would essentially cost like a year's wages back in the 1300s, the 1400s. This just illustrates how far we've come. This is how much light you can buy with hours of labor. Okay. And so you can really, again, see the takeoff in 1800 in terms of how much you could buy per an hour of labor. It starts down here at like 12 or something. Goes over here where you can buy 10 million lumen hours for an hour of labor. Huge change. Okay. And now the consequence is the world is all lit up. Here we have the good old USA, and you can see all those nice shining lights in night. And just as a side note, luminosity, or how lit up your country is, development economists will use this as a proxy for growth. So it turns out, how light the world is, or how lit up you are at night, is a good proxy for growth. So when we don't have good GDP data, we could actually just use this light data, and it's a great proxy for development. All right. So what does all this mean? Well, it means that the world is changing incredibly rapidly. All right. So incomes are going up, and just what your life looks like, as I already mentioned, looks very different than your grandparents. You may notice this if your grandparents are ever trying to use a computer or something like that, how baffling it is to you. And then you put an iPad in front of a toddler and they just like automatically know it. This is just showing the differences in just how technology has changed over a short period of time. Even the communists are recognizing how much it is changing. This is in the beginning of that change in the 1850s. All right. So what was the big change? Well, it's the Industrial Revolution. So really, this Industrial Revolution that starts initially in England, and then spreads to Western Europe, and then spreads to Japan, and it's spread through most of the world now. This is really what kicks off this change, this huge growth, this huge economic growth, this huge sustained innovation that we've seen over the past 200 years. All right. And this is essentially the institutions in England allowed for this innovation, and this adoption of the market economy kind of facilitated these unprecedented changes that we have seen over the past 200 years to where we live in this dynamic society where we have constant innovation, which was not the norm prior to 1800. So we look at human history. We see that everything changes in 1800. Boom, there's growth shoots up. So if we're just thinking about the economic history of the world, there's really two periods: before 1800 and after 1800. Before the Industrial Revolution, after the Industrial Revolution. Human history, in terms of economic history, is not linear. There is this inflection point where everything changes. So this course will really be focused on that inflection point. But the big question: were these changes good? All right, have they been net positive, net negative for human history? Find out in the next video.